Uh, Hello, everyone. This is Mahesh Paudyal from the Gorkha Times. We welcome you all to the maiden talk show Gorkha Times is initiating, and this is the first talk show of this kind. And today we have a very extremely eminent panelist with us to discuss on the topic why Nepal matters. Before we go on, I would like to introduce our eminent panelist. We have with us Professor Tulasi Diwas. Professor Tulasi Diwas, as we know, is a leading Nepalese poet, folklorist, and culture expert. Professor Diwas has been Professional Associate Communication Institute East-West Center, Hawaii, USA, visiting researcher at so many faculties, and he has worked extensively on poetry and folklore, and especially in intangible cultural heritage. And I take much pride in introducing him as one of the most leading living poetic legends of our country. So you're welcome, Professor Diwas, to our maiden talk show, Why Nepal Matters. We have with
Thank you so
us
much.
Dr. Barbara Nimri Aziz. Dr. Barbara Nimri Aziz has been in Nepal for quite a long time. To tell very precisely, she has started visiting Nepal in 1969 as a student, as a researcher of anthropology. During an active 20 years time she spent in Nepal, she has worked a lot, especially on Tibet frontiers, families, and women empowerment issues in Nepal. Among her seminal publications are Tibetan Frontiers Families, Sounding in Tibetan Civilization, Here to a Silent Song, Rebel Women of Nepal. She is also a journalist and she runs radio programs. She is also interested in editing and compiling works, especially by people of Arab origin, and she stays in America, and she has continued her research, journalistic activity, and writing. You are welcome, Dr. Barbara, to our talk show.
Namaste to everyone.
We have with us another very eminent panelist, Professor Dr. Anand Sharma. Professor Dr. Anand Sharma is a PhD. His area of interest is folk literature, and is a professor of English at Tribhuvan University. He has been a member of English Subject Committee, not only at Tribhuvan University, but also at Pokhara University and Kathmandu University, where he also is a visiting faculty. So I welcome you, Professor Anand. He is also a very brilliant critic of the geopolitical and security complexes of the region and of the globe, of course. So it's going to be a wonderful talk show with such eminent and experienced and seasoned panelists. As we have said, why Nepal matters? The title itself is both very vague and very broad, and it will not be easy for us to deal with all the aspects of why Nepal matters, because Nepal is also a nation state. It is also a civilization. It is also a culture. It is also a security complex in itself. Therefore, we shall be limiting our talk show to art, literature, and cultural aspect of why Nepal matters, because ours is, a literary website. I want to start this talk show with Professor Tulasi Diwas. Professor Diwas, you have spent decades studying Nepal's folklore, songs, and culture, besides doing poetry. So because when we identify you, besides a poet, we also identify you as an expert of culture. So from that position, when you look at Nepal, if you are asked to define Nepal on cultural terms, how would you define Nepal on cultural parameters, Professor Diwas?
Thank you, Mahesh. It's my great pleasure to be here at this wonderful program. I really like the way you present it. My area and field, as you have rightly said, folklore and culture. From the point of view of folklore and culture, Nepal is the country of diverse people, diverse culture, language. In other words, from the point of view of culture, is the country of cultural diversity and ethnic diversity, biodiversity. But the diversity, what we have, is the wealth of Nepal. So there is unity in diversity in our culture, though it's being dominant by the different forms of greater culture, but people are one way and other, as you know, as we know, there are more than 125 different ethnic and caste groups in Nepal. Likewise, they speak 123 languages, but from our study, there are more than 140 different ethnic and caste groups and more than 140 different language groups in Nepal. In order to be familiar with this culture of Nepal, one should be familiar with the shape, size, position. That is, where is the geography of Nepal? I mean, this is 3/4 of the total area is covered by the mountains. And most of the people, they live in Tarai, in many hills of, many hills, range of, and then Surya Parvatmala, what we call in Nepali, and then the greater Mahabharata hills and the white Himalaya. So I think that we have to really think in terms of, it was earlier said that this is the garden of 4 castes and 36 different ethnic groups. Now things have changed as it has gone up. As I told you that there will be more than 140 different ethnic groups. The Nepali culture is the amalgamation of all these different people's way of life, or their way of thinking, their way of singing and dancing, their way of living, even their way of doing things. So Nepali culture, one way and other, is, as I told you, that Nepalese people are more with traditional culture, but they are not sticking all the time to the traditions. They wanted to go ahead and hand to hand with the process of modernization. The culture in Nepal, one is traditional, the other one is modern one. That what we have been importing and evolving from within this cultural system or political system or social system, what we have with us. And that's why we go together, hand in hand, the process of modernization, and at the same time, the traditional culture, what we call it, folklore and folk culture in our part of the world. And folklore in our context is not the thing of past. It is not dead. It is still living. And is still living, and that's a part of our day-to-day life here in Nepal. That's why the traditional culture.
I shall come to the heritage part and the clash of traditional and modern values later on in the second round of question. I want to turn to Dr. Barbara. Dr. Barbara, I know as I was introducing you, you are an anthropologist by training, and you also love to call yourself a journalist. I shall come to that part of you as an anthropologist later on.
Oh.
In the beginning, I would like to know about some of your general impressions in Nepal. You spend a lot of time in Nepal, especially working in hills like Solukhumbu and Sankhua Sabha, if I'm not wrong.
Right.
Almost lying on the base of the Himalayas. You have seen that part of Nepal. You have also seen some part of like Kathmandu and some plains Nepal. So what is your reading of these people living in the most inhospitable like hinterlands in the foot of the Himalayas and people living in the plains in the Tarai. What is your general impression about Nepali people? But general impression.
That's very difficult to answer, but let me start and see where I come. In 1969, in the late 60s and 70s, those of us who went to Nepal from outside located ourselves in a village, wherever it was, on the Tarai or up in the hills, and we focused on one, what we called ethnic group or language group. And I don't think we contributed much to really understanding Nepal as a nation. Of course, that was the time of the monarchy, and visitors did not deal with politics at all. And if there was out-migration, I think we, again, were not very aware of it. The idea was this isolation. The impression maybe we gave other people and we had ourselves was isolated peoples, each with their own language, ethnic groups, rituals, etc. And I don't know to what degree that has contributed to anything in Nepal except for the foreign consumption that then, you know, the tourism really got started, I think, in the 80s, and our writings may have contributed to this exoticism. And I only, myself, I'm losing track here because your question is so extensive. I gradually, of course, the more time I spent in Nepal, became aware of it as a nation and I moved very strategically, you could say, from Solukhumbu, because I knew that my experience with the Tibetan and Sherpa people was not representative, or I'm not getting a picture of Nepal. And I moved, spent a little bit of time in the west in Jomasom, and then moved to the east as far as Teratum, where I spent some time with the Limbu people. And then I began to grasp the richness of Nepal as a nation. But I'm just thinking, coming out of Dr. Diwas's remarks, this diversity is extraordinary, and it's coming, I think it's coming into a new stage with the Janajati movement, which may be the politicization of ethnicity, again, with democracy, if I understand that and that's happened all over the world, hasn't it? That people once identified as a nation because Nepali was kind of imposed on every peoples, and there was an obligation for everyone to learn Nepali language and relate. It was very centralized, and with democracy, there's much more freedom of expression, and people of different ethnicities and languages have really grown, I guess. Again, Dr. Diwas can talk to this. And so I wonder now that, from what I understand, the Janajati movement is it's not much of a whole movement, but at least different groups are reimagining or consolidating, learning their language, or converting or learning to write their language, which may not have, like Rai people, I understand, are now writing in a Rai language form. And of course, the Newar have grown tremendously, and after years of suppression are now establishing very strong traditions. And then we even see that having an effect on Newar around the world, and same with Gurung and others. And I wonder then that richness might be threatening, you know, that sense of new political, it's not just folklore, and language history, it's a political force, and then how that is going to add to the nation building as a whole. So I'll just stop there. I know I moved around a lot, but
yes, you acknowledged the cultural richness Professor Diwas was talking about, and I want to turn to Professor Sharma now. And Dr. Barbara also acknowledges the cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and richness. Uh, Professor Sharma, if we consider Nepal's location, if we consider Nepal's location, it's a buffer state between two highly populous regions. Besides that, Nepal is home to several cultural and linguistic groups, and it is the cradle of at least two great religions of the world. To be very precise, Hinduism and Buddhism is very much rooted. These are very big religions of the world. They are very much rooted in Nepal's soil. So viewed that way, the resourcefulness of Nepal, the cultural, religious resourcefulness of Nepal is tremendous. And being a buffer between two great civilizations, the opportunities are so much, resourcefulness is so much. But the question is, did we cash that out? Do you think Nepal has done enough to benefit from its location between great civilizations, by dint of its being home to such great religions of the world? Do you think we benefited as much as we could? If not, where do you think lies the loophole? Sir Mike.
Thank you, Mahesh, for the question. See, one of the things, once you gave me all these issues that you are, I'll rather than talking it, coming up with a direct answer, which you might question later on if I'm not direct in your answers, I would like to bring in, because I'm a student of literature, I would like to bring in certain literary, let us say, citations also to, in one way or other, address this issue. Your question at one level is why Nepal matters when it is situated in such a situation, when it is the cradle of, when it has Buddhism, Hinduism, and all these things. But my question to you, and maybe this might bring up other questions also, is this debate about, let's say, establishing an already existing notion that Nepal really matters? Or is it an attempt? Let me finish.
We don't have any preconceived notion. We don't have any preconceived notion. It's a
okay. Now, because the statement or the topic was so ambiguous, as you rightly pointed out, that I wanted to reflect upon it. So are we, when you say we are a cradle of such big civilizations, Hinduism and this thing, so my concern is, are we debating on an established notions like Diwas sir or Miss Barbara are talking about how wonderful Nepal is, or are we making an appeal to the international and the national community that Nepal matters? Now, both the cases, I'm a highly pessimist person, honestly. In both the cases, what I find is Nepal has not been really able to, now to come to your answer, Nepal has not been, my position, we can always debate, Nepal has not been able to really reflect on this expression why Nepal matters, despite such amazing things that it has, and that we heard from Tulsi sir and Barbara, this thing. Because I will start with the assumption that Nepal has not been able to prove its relevance neither to people nor to the having such things. Let me, a couple of weeks back, an online paper which said, there was a story, there was a narration, and the narration started with, I am Dhan Bahadur. And this Dhan Bahadur was in Kailali Gaurifanta, that border belt. And he tells a narrative, he says, I am Dhan Bahadur, I am standing on the line. In front of me, there are hundreds of people. After me, there are hundreds of people. all these COVID-19, social distancing, everything is thrown into the air. What they are expecting is they want to move into India. And amazingly, kids, what was amazing was the young men, not only young men, but women with children, breastfeeding their children. Everyone was standing there, and there was an element of fear. The fear was not from COVID, but the fear was whether the officials in the Indian border will allow them to enter into India or not. So once Dhanbahadur crosses the line and he's allowed to into the Indian territory, and he reads "Welcome to India," the narration ends very painfully. Man, this is where I find where Nepal is right now, despite all these beauties that we are talking about. And this is what he says. It was in Nepali. I made a crude translation. He says, this is what he thinks. He looks back. Once he enters the territory, looks back, says, well, now, this particular, give me 2-3 minutes more. This particular incident me or remind me of a narration written almost 72 years back by Alan Paton in Cry the Beloved Country. The very first page, what is so interesting about the commonality between these two things, although separated by region and time and space, everything, is
Not hearing. I'm not hearing it. His voice is frozen.
There's a pause. There's a pause. Uh, the talk should not show any pause. So if Professor Sharma, you are able to hear me, we agree that Nepal does matter, but we have not been able to justify why it matters. So the loophole should be somewhere there. Is it? So Professor Sharma is away. He'll be signing in. I want to come to Professor Diwas. Professor Diwas, you said, you talked about the horizontal cultural diversity moving from western part of Nepal to the east, and the vertical cultural diversity right from the southern border up to the mountains. Now, culture shapes the civilizational character. Like the Arabs have a civilizational character. The Indians have a civilizational character. The Nepalese also have a civilizational character. And I believe you will agree with me that culture shapes the civilizational character. The culture makes people tolerant. The culture makes people hardworking. The culture makes people respect others. So what type of national culture, national character has been shaped by our cultural diversity? What does your experience say? Professor Diwas.
I have told you just the reality of what we have in the area of culture and the cultural diversity. But we have not yet cast the richness of our cultural diversity. And not really, now the time has come, though I think there are now different acts the government has really coming up with to recognize, to endorse the existence of different ethnic groups with their culture. So culture is not the thing of past. It is not a static concept. It's a dynamic concept. It is always moving towards present and then future. So we have to have how to really be familiar with this the kind of cultural mobilization and to recognize different ethnic groups living in different part of the country, and to provide them proper, to recognize them with their culture. As I have said in one interview a few days earlier, that Nepal is the living cultural museum of folklore and traditional culture and tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Each and every ethnic groups, they have their own culture, and that is what they identify. That is how they identified themselves with their cultural tradition in terms of their the belief system, what they have, as I told you earlier, in the way of their living, or even the performing the dance and music, all these kind of things. Now, I think I have been the member also of this cultural policy of the government. And we have really uh, tried to come up with all these, to answer these kind of questions, what we have with us regarding this cultural right or the folk lore kind of right with the people. And the best thing is to, let's see, you have I think rightly pointed out that Nepal, as I think I have developed one concept long time back, the horizontal concept of culture in terms of the different altitude of a mountain. If you start your journey from the bottom of the hill and reach top of the hill, with the change of altitude, the flora and fauna, the way of life, and even the belief systems, their dance and music, their even costumes, their instruments, and their even festivals, all they change, and they have, that is what is the real unique cultural what we have with us in one tall mountain. And I was a few years back, that is 25 years back, in America under this local culture, the state of local culture in different parts of the world. And I was told by one of our experts in culture, one American professor, that we have 3 layers of culture in our mountain or hill. But in the context of Nepal, we have more than 5 or 6 or up to them 7 cultural layers in one mountain. So I mean, in terms of this vertical concept of culture, in the context of Nepal, you come to know Nepal. You don't have to really go around. You just ascend one mountain and right from bottom and go to the top. So there will be also the different of religious followers. That this is what is true even in the context of Nepal. So Nepal is, that is the amalgamation, the cultural, Nepalese culture is living and very productive, but we have to make it productive. And then we means the government and the common people and those related people, they have to take initiative to cast the cultural property, what we have with us, to in terms of this development process, what we have, and to recognize people, unless we recognize them. Because I think this is recently, the different ethnic groups have been recognized, and they have to still emotionally attached with the national culture, what they say in Nepal. So they have to be recognized, and they have to give their point of a kind of recognition means, in other words, they will be also emotionally attached with not only their culture, but the national culture. but they have to see their faces. They have to see their dances and music. They have to see their cultural values recognized as part of the national culture. So this is, I feel that's very important. I have been studying for the last 50 and 60 years, different ethnic groups living in different part of the country. And I have traveled on foot more than 65 or 66 districts then. And we have, I am also the president of Nepali Folklore Society. We have been studying different ethnic groups in terms of folklore and folk life, covering all their way of life and covering their language and their history, because the history in Nepal is the written one and become the history of the rulers right from the past and up to now present. They are the history of the rulers, kings, and they're the history of the prime ministers and ministers, not the people's history has come out. And the people were not recognized that way. I think the national history of Nepal, one way and other, should include the oral history, what they have with them in the name of oral folklore, in the name of folk legends and folk ballads and folk songs, what they have, and folk tales or proverbs and riddles, what they have with them. So the concept of oral history should be recognized and then taught in due course of time as part of the history in some of our universities or even in schools. This is what I find very, very important. And we have to really get ready and prepared to recognize their position, their place in the in national culture. This is what I have to say. I really appreciate the Barbara.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that richness is very inviting.
Yes.
I mean, the word rich, one wants to use it for all kinds of purposes, to strengthen Nepal, to create a broader image of what the country is. But the question is for not just Nepal, how is it done? Is it done by a central authority, or is it done sometimes through political, if not conflict, at least a political awareness that is against the central authority? And all of you know the history of America, where the diversity of this country before the white Europeans came was very rich, and it has been essentially destroyed. And what we have are museums of folklore of different Native American peoples. And you all know, especially today, the awareness of the Black struggle in the United States. And there have been, of course, the civil rights movement of the 60s, which after which there were new departments of African American literature and African American history and so forth. And then they declined, actually. And now you see what is happening with not just in terms of conflict, but in terms of an awareness of those people who now are coming out and speaking and demanding that, and they are in the leadership of it. It's not the white people here, but it's the Black people who are the experts of their own culture. And how can that happen in Nepal? When, it's a challenge. Maybe, for example, if a Rai person became president of Nepal, or a Gurung, I don't know the history of the leader. Well, we know, we do know that the highest positions have been occupied by a very narrow segment of Nepali society. If someday there was a Gurung or Tamang president or vice president or prime minister, maybe that could shift so that there's a sense of those people uh, being part of the power structure. You know, I keep bringing the politics into this. You can't avoid.
Barbara, your question obviously is political, and this question trickles down to Professor Anand Sharma. He was making a polemic that we all agree that there is so much of diversity and resourcefulness and richness and so on. There's no question to that. But then the question lies in how much have we been able to showcase this, capitalize this, and benefit from that. And Professor Sharma confessed that he's a pessimist, but there is a lot of sense in whatever he's saying. I also subscribe to that idea that we have not been able to benefit from this richness. So there should be a loophole somewhere. Professor Sharma, where do you look at the loophole? Is it politics that failed us? Is it the researcher and the academia that did not do the optimum degree of work? Or where else do you see the problem? Why we are not visible in the globe in spite of this cultural baggage?
Okay, so sorry, my net just means I got disconnected. But as I was trying to tell Ki, what to means, my concern is I don't deny the beauty and everything about the nature, natural resources and diversity and languages. But for me, at least, they can only make relevance when it is a part of the national ethos. We cannot just have things on their own. For example, let me ask you and all the panelists also, we always harp on the idea that Nepal is the second largest hydro generating capacity nation. And we always say that we have the capacity to produce 84,000 megawatts of all these things. So, but we cannot even produce 1,200 megawatts for the local consumption. So the question is, nation as such does not make sense if it cannot hold its people, if it cannot initiate and inspire its people. Why I say this is, that's why I just wanted to read one line from one paragraph, small paragraph from Cry the Beloved Country, because see, we have to look into these statistics also, that every day from Kailali Gauri Fanta, the record says 1,500 to 2,000 people leave for India, and that is one point of reference. Whereas, and this is a festive season, mind you, this is a time when people return. And whereas only around 300 people enter into Nepal. So where do we make sense of a nation? What is a nation when it cannot hold its people? Now this is the case that I wanted to show. This is where Alan Paton makes so much of relevance to our present context when he says, he describes South Africa just like we can describe Nepal. The hills are beautiful, the birds are there, we have the finest rivers, we have the best of the natural resources. But this is how the first page and the last paragraph of that first page ends. He says, the great red hills stands desolate, and the earth has torn away like flesh. The lightning flashes over them, the clouds pour down upon them, the dead streams come to life, full of red blood of earth. Down in the valleys, women scratch the soil that is left, and the maize hardly reaches the height of a man. They are valleys of old men and old women, of mothers and children. The men are away, the young men and the girls are away. The soil cannot keep them anymore. So what is the purpose of a nation when it cannot hold its young people? See, Cormac McCarthy has written a wonderful, brilliant but a brutal book called No Country for Old Men. The same thing can be said about Nepal right now. This is no country for young men and women. And yet, how do we rejoice the question that I always ask myself is, having all the beauties of the world means, if we look at the natural endowments upon Nepal, we can say it can be counted among the top 3 nations of the earth. But look at what we have done to ourselves. So let me end with this note before others question my position, that there is a wonderful expression in this WTO protesters which says, we talk about 1%ers versus the 99ers. See, it's a classic study. Nepal can be a classic study of this 1%ers versus the 99ers. Nepal makes sense to those people who do not need Nepal. But Nepal has, I would very strongly, let us say, assert that Nepal has failed, does not make sense or does not matter to those 99%ers who really it should be matter, issue of matter. So I may be presenting a pretty bleak picture, no doubt about it. But
The
I will not,
counter question
I will
immediately
debate
follows,
on that.
Professor Sharma. The counter question immediately follows. You have yourself invited the counter question. So who failed actually? Who failed? Who carried Nepal to the state of non-mattering state? Like we have never been colonized. That's how we take pride in. There have been no big aggression from anywhere. We are a very safe nation. There is no much of like a civil war and those discernible conflicts and all. So what actually failed? Is it politics you are hinting at? Is it the academia? Is it the cultural leadership? Is it the planning? Where is the failure then? In your
See, let me answer you very straightforward. We are stuck with this absurd notion. Let me be very forthright. This absurd notion that we were never colonized. What do you mean by never colonized? Means, does it mean, see, the very concept of colonization also has been, the definition has stretched. You don't need to be politically colonized now. You might be colonized from so many different angles. And coming to who should we be blame all these things to? Definitely, number one, the politics at present. Number two, definitely the intellectuals. And the interesting thing is that these are the people who belong to the 1%ers. And they have the liberty to do anything. And that's why it does not matter to them. Personally, if you ask me, I will say I belong to the 1%ers. And it does not. Whether Nepal matters to me or not does not matter at all. I may love my country, but I have the liberty. But there are people who cannot, who are so stuck to this land. Do you think that people at this point of time would like to leave their country and villages and go to India? They say, my goodness, it is the hunger that is killing me more than I fear this COVID-19. So the question comes is, despite all these things, definitely the political system, see, when Marcellus in Hamlet says to Horatio, he says, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. He was not cursing the nation, mind you. He was not cursing the nation. He was making a statement on this moral and political corruption that was festering the nation. And no nation, mind you, no nation can prosper despite all its resources if you have an this intellectual community who is corrupt and pervert, and a political system that does not even have any idea what it is doing. So we are caught in this double bind, out of which means I don't know whether culture can save us or not, or whether we have to wait for the statement given by Horatio Hamlet. Horatio says at one point, says, heaven will do it. Maybe that's the only answer. Means again, I don't know. It might sound very brutal, but someone has to say something. We cannot just come up with some wonderful images of Nepal when the people are suffering. And what is a country? I would question. A country is nothing, mind you, if it cannot hold its people in its soil. It's a barren land.
I want to stop you here. I shall come back with a grilling question. Like, intellectuals at times have been advisors to the top ranking authorities of Nepal. Intellectuals have been in the planning commission. Intellectuals have been in the parliament. And still, something is rotten in the state of Nepal. I shall come with this question later on. But Professor Diwas, what shall we do? The picture Professor Sharma is presenting is very bleak and something is rotten. The picture you and Barbara are presenting is very bright with all this richness and cultural heritage and all. Something something is wrong. There is a discrepancy. So what should we do, speaking from cultural point of view, what we all need to do today to showcase Nepal so that it has a respectable position and respectable like presentation on the globe today? What do we need to do now, Professor Diwas?
I think to some extent, I agree both Dr. Barbara and Dr. What's his name? I forgot his name.
Anand Sharma.
Dr. Anand, yeah, Anand Sharma. From the cultural point of view, my approach, culture is not enough, but without culture, without really going down into the layers of culture and come up with and make use of it, is very difficult to really bring our people up to this standard, what we are looking for. And only all the time throwing just kind of dust, throwing just kind of to the politician is not enough. We also have to take the responsibility. And we have to really come out. We have to stand up. What we are really looking for. And keeping in mind the cultural richness and heritage, what we have with us. If you don't really make use of that richness of culture, it's of no use. Just talking high of culture in itself is not that really, I don't give that much importance to this, but I agree with Dr. Barbara. The day will come, it's not that far. Even the people of different ethnic groups, they will come up and take cheers, the highest cheers, like president, prime ministers, or even vice president is already from the Gurung or the Magar community. And there are others also. People are coming up doing that, but it will take some more time. Unless we try, unless we come up with, unless we be together with, talking is not enough, doing is more important. So unless we do it, talking, so in this context, talking is important, but not enough. Doing is important. How to make to do things from the tiers or the high tiers and high level. And only government, I think, we don't have to really all the time blame the government, but at the same time, we have to blame ourselves. We have not taken that initiative. We have not come up with. Now, with this discussion, we are coming out and trying to give out some of this, our kind of dissatisfaction, some of what we have really, concealed it within ourselves, within our mind. Now things have to come out and let the people come up and let them take initiative. The people will take initiative in due course of time. They won't be all the time like this. The things will change, really come up with. That's why I feel, but if we take the right kind of decision and the right ways to really to solve all this kind of political problem, cultural problem, and both financial, social, political kind of things together with. So that is more important. So awareness is more important, and then action is more equally important. That to come down to the action, we have to take initiative and let the bearers of culture come up with all this kind of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, or look for their position, look and try to find out. So it's not only government, it's the people, it's intellectual or the experts of different areas have to take initiative and come up with and together and let go ahead with. This is what I.
Okay, Barbara,
I'll jump in here.
The issue that you were already talking about, and before you go on, I want to add one thing there. Uh, since the 70s, you had been studying particularly the women's case in Nepal, like your book, Here to a Silent Song, Rebel Women of Nepal is a case in point. This, your argument was also about pragmatic democracy, where these small identity groups also have a stake. They have a bearing, they have a say, they have a representation. So studying right from the days of Yogmaya, for example, till our own day, what have you seen? Has not there been a tremendous amount of change in the political structure of Nepal, having a lot of people in like in the top position? If not the president, the vice president of this country has come from ethnic minority. This is the reality. So don't you think there are gradual changes in the political structure of this country? How do you see?
Well, I don't have to tell you. I mean, first of all, it's democracy and getting rid of the monarchy. I mean, that was, it was a revolution, right? It was a revolution. And I'm proud of Nepal in that this revolution, really by international standards, did not take the lives of martyrdom of many Nepalis, really. 13 or 16,000 is nothing by international standards. And also that the king was deposed, thrown out completely, but he's still alive. It was, in a way, a bloodless coup. Of course, I mean, education fundamentally is now universal. And I agree. I mean, the number of women in all professions and in politics, including the presidency, is very, very important. Everyone knows that. And I'll just mention, I have a new book coming out. It's in press now in Nepal, and it's called Yogamaya and Durga Devi, Two Rebel Women. And it's an assessment of my observations. It's my observations over these 40 years since I first started studying the history of these women in Bhojpur area. But I'd like to jump to another issue in terms of Nepal's global influence. Nepal is essentially seen from outside as a playground for trekkers and mountaineers. Let's face it. I confront people every day in my life here in the US who, oh, you work in Nepal. And the image they have is completely, it's very, very narrow. And it's essentially mountains and exotic images of people carrying baskets. And I try to enlighten people in a positive way. I don't want to put down, and talk about difficulties all the time, but that's essentially the image. And I think Nepal exploits this image. I think the government exploits it. I think Nepali people exploit it. I think people who go outside Nepal, especially to Europe, Australia, America, do not do much in terms of writing about realities. And again, I'm not talking in a negative way, but I think they fall into that pattern. After all, it's very flattering. Let's face it, it's very flattering, that wonderful image of the folk people and the trekking, really. And most people who arrive in Nepal to trek, they don't want to deal with the realities. They get out of the city and the smog, and they're in these beautiful hills, and with that image reinforced. Now, and then the NGO, the whole NGO system there, they're dealing with the opposite, with the people in need, with the development issues, and they're exploiting Nepal too. I mean, what does it add up to? Billions and billions of dollars. And again, it's part of a romantic notion of helping people. And yet you've got 4 to 6 million Nepalis living abroad. I'm just talking about the migrants to the Middle East and Malaysia. forget about the hundreds of thousands of Nepalis who've resettled permanently around the world. And so one wonders, you know, how to, well, okay, another part of this, of the, the limited or the isolation of, let's say, people like Sherpa and Gurung and maybe another hill people who've come into the city. You know, I've noticed that they're now going into the mountains as never before. They're going hiking, they're going trekking. There are flights all over the place. And that is also wonderful. That's another process that is going on. And Sherpa people I know who grew up in Kathmandu, who don't speak Sherpa, are now going for the first time in 20 or 30 years, the first time in their life. These are 25-year-olds, are going to Solu for a holiday. And their lands are still intact. So there is a possibility of new development there. Now, this is a very different issue than the first one I raised. So I'd like to come back to the first one of this exaggerated, very romantic view of Nepal, which is totally in contrast. And I don't know if it helps Nepal. I don't know if it helps. I'll leave it there.
It doesn't. And that's what Professor Sharma also would agree, that
Yes.
It doesn't, if all this eulogization like depicting Nepal as an Arcadia has done practically nothing. So Professor Sharma, I would also like to continue with your earlier logic. Yes, something has failed and politics is one of that. And in spite of the fact that high intellectuals have been advisors, like Professor Diwas was himself telling, he has been a part of like cultural policy framing mechanism. And you also have been stakeholders at time, though I don't want to mention it like overtly to our
No,
like.
I have no problem. I'll mention it. Don't worry.
But then please, if you mention and ease the task for me, that will be wonderful. So do you think the decision makers are adamant, the leaders are adamant, or the advisors change the moment they are into the mechanism? Where lies the real like problem?
See, Mahesh, sometimes I hope I can be as optimistic as Miss Barbara and Diwas sir, but I don't know where I fail. But coming to your point is, again, without any hesitation, I would say that this country, which is again beautiful, no doubt about it, resourceful, yet the tragedy with this country is it is caught between these two extremely dangerous communities. One, a highly pervert intellectual community. Again, I would not hesitate to state this expression. Another, a highly ignorant, stupid political community. But more, I would admit, you're right. I was one of the members associated in the Prime Minister's office, and believe me, that was the most distasteful time for me in my life, and I never talk about it, because when I looked into the corridors of power, I found them, means they are pathetic, mind you. So that's why I don't blame them, because they are so ignorant. But the more dangerous part is the bureaucracy, I would say. The more dangerous community is the intellectual community. And they are to be more, and the perversion of these. That's why I say it's merciless when talking about this stinking of Denmark can be equated with the stinking of Nepalese scenario in moral and political this thing. And another very disturbing thing is that when it comes to, as we said, we are between these two big nations, even when it comes to the notion of patriotism, we are so selective. My goodness, our patriotism is only meant to serve our vested interest. At times, we are playing the patriotic card to serve our interest. At times, we are playing the victim card to serve our interest. Right. So at one level, honestly, I don't really see anything beautiful. I mean, the reason why I say this is that when you look into this world, 30 years, forget the Panchayat regime. 30 years is a long period of time in the history of a nation to take a track, to take a route into a particular, to see a progress or a process being adopted. And in last 30 years, you tell me, or anyone can come and let us debate, what have we achieved? And I will not agree with this idea that throwing off the monarchy was an amazing achievement. See, you have to define achievement in sense of material achievement also. So where do we stand? Simply we threw the monarchy, but what have we come up to? And one more thing, let me add. We have dismantled and destroyed the past. Why I see Nepal in a very dangerous scenario is we have systematically dismantled the past, and any nation which dismantles the past for some vested interest of the present is really jeopardizing its future. You tell me, or anyone can tell, Miss Barbara, let me finish. Anyone can convince, can you convince me at least, or anyone, that we now have an iconic image or an iconic figure which binds us, which unites us? No, we have dismantled everything. So when you systematically dismantle the past, when you systematically dismantle your stories that you had inherited for the last, let us say, several centuries, what are you trying to prove by saying that we have come up with a wonderful system? Again, I'm not in favor of monarchy, but I have every right to question the existing political system, including the people. I blame myself also for that. So I don't find anything that really unites this nation. And that's a big tragedy and a disaster for a nation. That is what I feel.
One question, what do you mean by dismantle the past? What, can you give me examples?
Let us say, I'll give you one example because you have been to Nepal. I visited Gorkha once on a teacher training program. And as we were walking towards the Gorkha castle where Prithvi Narayan Shah started, there is a place people showed me. They said that here stood the statue of Ramsa. There is a saying, and which was such a part of the cultural ethos of Nepal: if you don't get justice, go to Gorkha. So that was one ethos that we had inherited. But when I went there, I saw the statue was missing. And I asked the people, what happened to the statue? And they said it was toppled after the revolution. Now, my concern is simply toppling these legacies, which have been a part of our national ethos, is what I mean by dismantling the past. And when you dismantle the past, not for a valid reason, but to serve your political or some vested interest, I would definitely say that we are doing injustice to the past, and we are doing injustice to the nation as such, to our cultural heritage. That is one of the examples.
But what about the restoration of Lumbini? What about the great Buddhist centers of Kathmandu?
Honestly speaking, I don't think that a dramatic shift, mind you, we can again argue on this. I don't see a dramatic shift coming in the national debate after the restoration of these people. Even if it is Lumbini, we are still fighting with India with the idea that, oh, Buddha was born in Nepal. So do you mean that is what culture is all about? That is what legacies are all about?
We shall come back to this question, because that's very interesting. Professor Diwas, there is also a ray of hope. I can see on you a metaphor of hope and optimism. And you said Our intangible cultural heritage is a living cultural heritage. We, in spite of the fact that certain things have been dismantled, and Professor Sharma, we have saved our songs, we have saved our poetry, we have saved our intangible cultural heritage, we have saved our folklore. As Professor Diwas has traveled to more than 70 countries of the world, if I'm not wrong, carrying the mess, carrying our stories, carrying our folk tales, carrying our poetry, and carrying our dreams and the collective unconscious. You have been published in more than 35 languages of the world, and you have met poets across the globe, traveling as a poet of Nepal, and yourself being a very leading modern poet of Nepal. Do you also subscribe to the idea of Professor Sharma that everything has been dismantled, or you say we still have retained some living cultural heritage and poetic heritage and literary heritage? What is the present you have seen, Professor Diwas? The question is more about poetry that we have saved.
Actually, if you don't mind, I will recite one or two of my poems that might be helpful to go ahead with what you really asked for. The first one is the translated one into English by Dr. Avi Subedi, The Old Day. From the vast, stretching Greenland of my mind, up to the rows of elevating blue hills of thought, with the lengthening dark shadows of time tree. In every successive evening, I wonder how the old day climbs the hill. I wonder how the old day climbs the hill with a walking stick nowadays. Passing through the white wood of gray hair and beard of time, and collecting the yellow sun rays scattered over the mountain hills and uncovered hills. Why does he offer the red flowers of his faith to the sanctuary of mountain deity? Still one more rock, to the heap of the rocks again, plucking the red sun itself instead, not finding even a piece of rock again. Why does he go down the growing slope of darkness? Why does he go down the growing slope of darkness, and going round the white mountain of crystal rock, collection, the unsold items in the winnowing tray of sun, and going round the white mountains of crystal rock, collection the unsold items in the winnowing tray of sun, closing the doors of the warehouse of the sunlight, around the heads of the highway, where time walks slowly on foot, where time walks slowly on foot as the light gone down, as the light gone dirty, being caught in the net of darkness, begins to crawl slowly, slipping down the lamp post, burning a thin wick in the small leaflet of mind a little, in the sunken little murky sky, in my own chest, searching out in the blue sky. The streets, trails, bends again in the maze of blue, yellow, and red linings of wrought threads, suspended on the branchless bare tree of still iron, and still taking them as the poles of Titipati and Simali trees, grouping for the lost and by invoking the primordial mantra and throwing around the uncooked magical rice in the faith of finding some way out, in the faith of finding some way out, as if recalling something, suddenly in the middle of crossroad, transforming himself into a road, entangled in the very thread of road itself. Why does he himself get lost at the bend of the level road of time again? And the title was, as I told you earlier, The Old Day. And I would like to recite another short poem. And then the title is Procession of Colored Voices. Blue voices jumping down the sky, float over the blue ocean. Red voices emitted by martyrs' blood, drying steadily, spill over rhododendron petals. Yellow voices descending from the evening horizons are nestling in the other layers of marigold. White voices melting out of the barricade of clouds freeze over the solid high-rise bottom of the Himalayas. Green voices startled escape from the evergreen dense forest, passing by the shrill mountain cliffs and bare hills, get uprooted with the tearless banks, get uprooted with the tearless banks, even from the agricultural land, migrating down in green fluidity, piling up green deposit to the bottom of the sea. Black voices blemished by the mental pestilence, aridity of mind and fall of conscience are surging up in the flood of untamable darkness through the black tunnel, the overflowing river of seething time. I, who came out in search of a voice, lost my own voice itself. I, who came out in search of a voice, lost my own voice itself in the melee of voices, and returned home, utterly voiceless, white and lonely, after joining with respect this procession of colored voices, a color game of holy, a color game of holy played by time. Is this silent homecoming of mine my attainment of Buddhahood? Is this silent homecoming of mine my attainment of the Buddhahood, or a preparation for another grand renunciation like this, colorless indecision I'm voicing, a continuous, voiceless decision? I think our discussion of Dr. Anand and Dr. Barbara and your questions, one way and other, encourages me to recite these 2 points of mine and how they are. Please go ahead.
As a poet, you ought to be doing that, and thank you so much for being proactive, reading your poems. And your poems are in a way answering the questions that I had directed you. Both have a very positive note of ending. The first one talking about the continuity of a means, evolution and journey, and the second one conglomeration of all those colors as imagination into one, and that's leading to your enlightenment or Buddhahood. This positivity is something that inspires, and this positivity will be ascertained and affirmed by Professor Sharma at the end of the show. I come to Barbara. Barbara, see, when I look at your profile, I can see you have you have some background in the Arab world, you have worked in the US, you have worked in Tibet, you have worked in Nepal and Algeria. So having worked in so many different cultural spaces, did you see anything so unique in Nepal that you would advise us to develop that to make ourselves like visible and then invite some rays of hope and positivity on our part? What is so unique about us that you noted as a foreign scholar and a researcher? This is the last question.
I'm always embarrassed by your questions, Mahesh, because they require such a profound answer, and I don't have it. Let me say, I had no political interest in Nepal initially. I went to do my PhD. I went to a village, stayed there up in the mountains for 11 months solid. I was healthy, I was loved, I was successful in gathering enough data to write a PhD. And 10 years later, I went to the Aran River Valley and learned about Yogamaya and Durga Devi, and through them met Parizat in the 80s and spent time with her. And it was through my understanding of Yogamaya's politics and then Parizat's politics, because that was the pre-revolution period in the 80s, I became politicized. That was where I grew a political awareness of the struggle, of the exploitation of people and use of culture to exploit. And then when I continued my work writing the first book, Heir to a Silent Song, I started to think about my own culture, the Arab culture, which I knew nothing about, nor my religion, the Muslim religion. I could write many essays about Buddhism, and I could speak Tibetan, but I was essentially illiterate in Arabic. And because of my political awareness, then I decided to go to the Middle East, just cold, really. I had passed through there on my way to India and Nepal, but I'd never resided in the Middle East. But because of my political awareness, I became very anti-anthropology. I believe now, and I believed even I had the inkling as a graduate student at University of London that anthropology is the child of imperialism. I still believe that. And you will see some, all of you know anthropologists who work in Nepal at least, and perhaps elsewhere. They're a very conservative, cowardly group of intellectuals who do not want to disturb the status quo. And I became really anti-academic and anti-intellectual, thanks to Yogamaya and Parizat in particular, and then developed my career in journalism, which I believe is a very profound and courageous career and profession, and I believe in it. And to come back to what our colleagues have been saying, I see there is kind of a division between the belief in intellectuals. I don't believe intellectuals can change anything, essentially. We write and we sound very erudite and we give lectures and so forth. But look at America. What have intellectuals done to reduce our racism and the violence? Nothing, as far as I'm concerned. And I think the journalists, if anyone, have done more, and essentially it's the people who are going into the streets. Not that I'm advocating that, but I agree with Dr. Sharma, that there is, we have to find a way outside the intellectual. I think Nepal may be caught in a grip. And hey, look at the journalism that has grown up in Nepal. since 1990. I mean, very vigorous, very diverse. I don't know what impact they are making on the society, but from outside, I am very impressed by it.
Oh, that's great. At least there is a note of positivity there in the last.
No, absolutely.
Great
Absolutely.
relief, Barbara. Would you like to add, or okay, so may I pass the question to Professor Sharma?
Go on.
Uh,
No.
Professor Sharma, this is going to be the last question of the entire talk show, and uh, I know age doesn't matter, but when you look at Professor Tulasi Diwas, he is almost 80, and 80-year-old guardian of ours is telling, look, there are rays of hope. There is a silver lining in the cloud. There is something we can do. And when we also consider the age and ripeness of Dr. Barbara, I have the same feeling. And they're telling, look, they have lived through a time. They have lived through an epoch. They have seen history coming and changing and dismantling, and like phoenix taking a set again and then flying. Don't you think politics and economy apart, there is also a space where the intellectuals can work, where the researchers can work, where the academicians can work, where the cultural activists can work, where the poets can work and still present an alternative Nepal, an intangible Nepal, that where we can really we can release and take relief in. Don't you think there is another space, a third dimensional space, where all of us can convene and work together and build for ourselves a wonderful present and future? So how would you tell about that?
No, look, I don't. It's just like, again, means literature is such a wonderful space to answer your question. One of the the play within the play in Hamlet, the player king says, our thoughts are ours, the ends none of our own. So when those thoughts that you are reflecting, that you think should, no one questions, no one, I'm not questioning what your thoughts are. Yes, I agree that that should be there. There should be a third space. The intellectuals must come together, and we must have a wonderful nation. Who denies that? But the question is, what is the ground reality? And mind you, Mahesh, one thing, I'm not someone who would be working for my descendants all the time. I want to see progress within my lifetime, and that's my right. So the question that comes is, I don't deny, let's have a wonderful time. But I will again, at the end, say that what Hamlet says at one point, I'm sick at heart, honestly, and another, to make you feel better, means it seems as if I have presented myself as a dead horse capable of nothing. See, yesterday was Gandhi's birthday. I am more a man, I'm more a Gandhian than Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. Why I say this is, Lakshmi Prasad Devkota always said, okay, aim for the sky, aim for the stars, aim for the, always see something that is wonderful and other things. But I take a good lesson from Gandhi. I have read that man a lot. And in one point he says, I don't want to see the distant future. One step is enough for me. So, and that step, I want to see that the step that I take in this soil makes sense to me and makes sense to the people who are living at this point in time. It's wonderful to talk about future and other things. Oh, I'm doing this for the future. I don't deny that. But the question is, why don't I have the right to enjoy the beauty, the resources of this nation at this point in time? Can't I expect good governance from at this point in time? So the question is very legitimate. I don't disagree with what you say. We can have a wonderful alternative and other things, but at the present point in time, I would definitely say I don't see that in near future.
Fine.
That's how I would like to end.
When you said, thankfully, when you said you are a Gandhian, you answered in a very optimistic way, because when Gandhi was working, he was working in a zero space. The politics was under crisis, economy was under crisis, the society was divided, and there was a lot of racial violence and so many other things. In spite of that, Gandhi kept working as a ray of hope, and he was not working for his day. His dreams are like still being worked out, and India is still evolving. So, so hearing that way, that was a great consolatory remark, at least for me. Thank you, sir, for at least bringing in Gandhi and relieving all of us. So with this, I would like to announce that we have come to the end of this wonderful talk. So Professor Diwas, in spite of your hectic schedules and so many engagements, you were kind enough to be here. You responded to the Gorkha Times call, and you enlightened us in today's talk. So I thank you very much from the side of my team, my editorial board, my advisors, and the entire family. Dr. Barbara, all the way from the United States, you came and shared your like readings of Nepal as a researcher from outside Nepal, and your words matter a lot, and we learn a lot from you, and I hope our viewers also benefited from your experience. And Dr. Sharma, it always is so necessary to have somebody so critical who talks about the real grounds and real facts, and that was why I had chosen to bring Professor Sharma here, because I knew that if you were not here, one part of the debate would be dismally missing, and I did not want to risk that. And I would like to tell one more thing. I would like to have this very panel with these three scholars once again after a gap of some weeks or some months, because my satisfaction still says, like, there is Oliver asks for more. So because Oliver asks for more, I would like to continue these debates, and let's see whatever we said today, how that develops. Is there any change after 6 months or 3 months or so? And that again, I will be inviting all my like a very enlightened panelists, and I hope you will be kind enough to join us. Thank you.
Mahesh, don't forget that
Thank
when
you.
Oliver asked
Thank
for
you.
more, what did he get? He got a bang on his head. So you
Well,
better be careful.
that I will take that bang as a lesson, that I will learn that if Oliver asks for more, he gets a bang, and that will still be a lesson. That will still be a lesson. And you know, as a learner, I would love to invite those lessons, positive or negative or whatever, that still inspire me to go on and on. And thank you so much, Professor Diwas.
Thank you so much for the
Thank you so
invitation.
much, Dr. Anand. You want to add something, Barbara, before
Well,
we
can
wrap?
I just thank you? Because I'm sure you have many opinions about why Nepal matters, but you have been very restrained, I think, during this hour and given the platform to us. But at some point, we're going to find out what you think too.
No,
Yes.
as a moderator, I know I will not have my opinion. I'm here just to ask questions, and your opinions matter more. One day, if I'm asked to be not a moderator but a panelist, I shall speak out about what I think about the future and present of Nepal. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful time ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.